Welcome to the Under 8 podcast, a 3 times per week college basketball show brought to you in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is Sunday, March 3rd, 3:15 p.m. My name is Josh Mullenix. On today's pod, Caitlin Clark breaks yet another NCAA record. Tennessee beats Alabama over the weekend, and a very important West Coast Conference matchup late on Saturday night. It's all right now on the Under 8 podcast. Josh Doering here with me. Of course, Josh, the headline will be that Caitlin Clark is now the all-time leading scorer in high major college basketball ever. No man, no woman has scored more points than she has. That will be the headline. But the outcome of today's game, equally as important, as Iowa takes care of Ohio State at home, splitting the season series. And in a 93-83 victory in which Caitlin Clark had 35, 9, and 6.
They were never going to lose this game, right?
Probably not.
At least after she announced that she was leaving, so that you knew this was the last game at home and This was senior night, it just kind of felt like there was no way they were going to lose.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The first time around, the major difference between this game today and the first matchup between these two teams was that the star guard got flanked by a really nice front court performance from kind of a co-star, so to speak. In the first game, it was Cody McMahon that had 33 or whatever it was. And in this particular game, it was Hannah Stuelke at 23 and 9 on 9 of 12 shooting. She kind of led the charge in terms of the supporting cast, but the rest of Iowa's starting lineup was very effective as well. Gabby Marshall is 4 of 8 from the field. Kate Martin, 5 of 10 from the field. So a much more balanced effort, and Hannah Stuelke had a really good game alongside Caitlin Clark.
Yeah. I was glad that we got a game like this, where Caitlin Clark missed, I think, 4 out of her first 5 shots, but had 5 assists really quickly. I think 4 of them were to Stuelke. It was some good passes in the half court, but specifically in transition. And yeah, everybody kind of got to have their moment, whether it was Gabby Marshall hitting a 3, Kate Martin driving to the basket. This group, I know Stuelke doesn't necessarily fit into that because she came at the end, but this group that's been around forever, that it was their senior night too, right? Not just Caitlin Clark.
Really?
It was cool to
wow.
It was cool to see that it was and the numbers, obviously, she kept scoring and got up into the 30s like it seems she always does. But it was a cool example of this is what it can look like when you don't have to force it. She was very comfortable early. She kept getting Stuelke really good looks, couple passes for threes, wasn't forcing anything. Eventually, she started knocking down shots, and it all came. And Ohio State put up a valiant effort. But yeah, when Cody McMahon doesn't have the game of her life like she did the first time around, everybody from Iowa steps up, and we're clearly determined not to lose this game. It was rather anticlimactic for the final record to fall on some free throws from a technical foul, but it is what it is.
Yeah. At least there's a very natural spot for people to cheer about it.
Yes, that is very true. Yeah. Yep. And so yeah, I mean, she's got all the records in the regular season, which I personally think is kind of cool that from an NCAA, right? She's got the NCAA women's record. She's got now the NCAA men's record. She has the women's high level, high major basketball record, whatever you want to call that Lisa Bluter has been insistent is the real record that she broke. Now she's got Pete Maravich to top it off with, the most accomplished scorer in the history of high level college basketball, period. And now we can see what happens come postseason.
Yep. I think it's interesting that the first quarter was really the only time that the two teams from a scoring perspective were were separated, and that, like as you mentioned earlier, was not really built on Caitlin Clark coming out and shooting, and knocking down 4 of her first 6 shots, and then they're up 20-8 kind of thing, and then kind of go from there. It was Hannah Stuelke, it was some of those other players getting involved and knocking down shots earlier, which is always the thing I come back to with this team. And granted, Caitlin Clark then kind of started to pick things up. Of course, she ends up with 35, but Iowa wins the rest of this game, the last 3 quarters, by 1 point,
Mhm.
and won the first quarter by 9, and
Yep.
they really got out to a quick start because of some of the shots that the other players were knocking down, and that will always be the thing that I'm looking for with this Iowa team. And to get that against a team as high quality as Ohio State is not an unimportant thing, because when you look at it, Josh, when you look at the list of teams that the list of impressive teams that Iowa had beaten this year, the list was basically IU, and that was it. Like there just weren't that many wins like this. Now, granted, it's not like they had played 8 games against top 25 teams and lost almost all of them. That's not really what actually happened. But they beat Virginia Tech really
Yep.
early in the season. Um, and then beat Kansas State. But you have the loss to Ohio State, you have the loss to Indiana, the loss to Nebraska. It had been a little while since you got this really complete performance against a really high level team, and so to get that this late in the season, as we're getting into March, is I think a big deal.
Yeah, they haven't been terrible. It's not like they can't beat good teams, but they haven't
No,
consistently. They've just won some and lost some, like most teams, right? Definition of a really good team that's not clearly better than every other team in the country, which is where we're at with this team heading into tournament time. Can they win the national championship? Sure. Is anybody going to pick them to? I mean, probably some people, because they have Caitlin Clark, so they've got the best player in the country. But I don't think either of us are convinced that they can do it, but neither of us are convinced that they will. And
Mhm.
yeah, that was what I was thinking about in the first quarter, just to piggyback off that real quick, is it's not like she has to score 40 for this team to be the best version of itself. She just has to be impacting the game constantly.
Mhm.
Obviously, she can do that if she's knocking down threes from the logo. But the fact that she can knock down threes from the logo forces double teams, forces teams to guard you differently, opens up things in transition. She's a very good passer with very good court vision. You got to see some of that, as long as the other players are taking advantage of those opportunities, which hasn't always happened, but did happen today, that might be, I would argue, that's the best version of this team, because she's going to get her points eventually. But
Mhm.
when you are getting punished for focusing too much on her, then you're in real trouble, because that's not working. And if you start slacking off of her, you're done for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A big time win for Iowa here on March 3rd. On the men's side, on Saturday, lots of action on the men's side. We got a couple of games we're going to highlight. Starting in the SEC, number 4 Tennessee 81, number 14 Alabama 74. Alabama winning this game at halftime. Nothing especially mind blowing from anybody on the side of Tennessee. Slow day for Dalton Connect. Pretty slow day for Sakai Ziegler as well. Those two guys were 10 of 32 from the field combined, just 5 of 21 from the 3-point line, but got enough from the starting lineup. Was a pretty balanced effort. Got enough from the bench. A couple guys knocking down shots in reserve, and it was enough to beat an Alabama team that didn't have the best of shooting nights either.
It's not every day you give up 74 points as the best defense in the country, and we still come away talking about an individual defensive performance. But
Mhm.
that's where we're at. And they scored 80 plus.
Yeah.
And the story of this game was Jemai Mashak's defense,
Yeah.
because Dalton Connect wasn't great. And now, okay, next step is they've got 2 more games left. They're in control of this conference. But it's also sort of this weird thing where we talked about this after the Auburn game too. Every game they play, if they lose it, pretty much whoever they lose to is now in control of this conference, or somebody else will be. But they keep winning these games, so it's theirs to lose right now if they can just finish off the season. The thing I was thinking about that I'm curious for your thoughts on, as Alabama was making that 12-0 run to end the half and sort of took control of the game for a while before Tennessee turned it around, I was just sitting there thinking, I can't really remember the last time this Tennessee team dictated a game against an elite opponent with their defense. Where their defense, and I know Alabama's arguably the best offensive team in the country, right? But you've had past versions of Tennessee, past versions of Virginia that can destroy anybody's offensive game plan with what they can do defensively. And this season, it's been a lot more of they're still really good defensively, but look, they score 75 plus points pretty consistently because they have arguably the best offensive player in the country.
Yeah.
And then Alabama missed 20 of their final 23 shots. And you went, oh, there it was. When they really needed it, they locked in defensively. Sometimes Alabama's just going to miss a bunch of shots. That's part of the risk-reward game that Nate Oates plays. But as soon as I started thinking about that and wondering how concerned I am about it come tournament time, there it was. They imposed their will defensively and took control of this game, turned it around, and looked like the best team in the SEC, which I firmly believe they are.
Yeah, I'm just you'd much rather have the defense when you need it rather than always need the defense.
Right. So that's the interesting part of this is because I'm right there with you that still 100% this team's more equipped, better equipped to go win in the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of curious if you get into one of these slugfests in the Sweet 16 or something, can they do what they need to do to win 62-58 or 68-62 or something like that? We know they can, but it feels like they haven't done as much of that. And part of it is because they're a better offensive team and don't need to. So I'm definitely with you that this is not necessarily a concern that's going to scare me. It was just something that I hadn't really thought about, but you haven't seen a lot of those. They just won because of defense, which is a credit to Rick Barnes and the ability to evolve as well. To
be fair, they've failed to score 75 points 3 times in conference play. They've lost all 3. 77-72 at Mississippi State, 63-59 at home against South Carolina, and then 85-69 at Texas A&M. It is interesting that they haven't won. I mean, even you go back to the beginning of the season, 71-67 against Purdue, 69-60 against Kansas. It's interesting because the numbers will tell you that their defense is very high level and to a certain extent is high level, right? But it is not the same. It is not the same determining factor in terms of winning basketball games as it has been in the past, which you could tell me is a good thing. You could tell me is a bad thing. I think there are both ways to, you could look at it from either direction. But what I will say is that it probably increases their chances of making it deep in the tournament.
It also comes down to matchups in the tournament too, right?
Sure.
Because if you don't get one of those teams that's trying to win ugly, and you get a bunch of good offenses that you can slow down a little bit, at least for 10 minutes, give Dalton Connect time to explode, get some other guys going, that's a perfect formula. So it'll be interesting to see their pathway and what they're going to have to do hypothetically to get from where they're placed in the bracket to the Final Four for that reason of, it's looked different this season.
And you'll never see Tennessee play a team that wants to score as many points as possible that has the upside defensively that Tennessee has.
Right.
In theory, that is always like in a game like against Alabama, where neither team is shooting especially well, Tennessee is almost always going to have the advantage in that kind of game.
Mm-hmm. And it was still from a tempo perspective, which is where I started thinking about this. I still feel like this was played more to Alabama's preference than Tennessee's. Tennessee was just good enough, right, and then had that really good defensive stretch that they were still able to win. But they're not grinding out games and eating up all of the shot clock and kind of shrinking everything, right, and maximizing every possession by minimizing the total number of possessions. They're not doing as much of that stuff because they've got the offensive firepower now to, right, in a game where both teams that felt like played good defense, we still had an 81-74 final score. That's just not things you usually associate with Tennessee.
Tennessee's 67th in the country in pace this year, 288th a year ago.
Bingo. There you go.
Yeah.
That's really what it came down to for me. Yeah. That I started thinking about.
Last but not least, on the West Coast, way after everybody went to bed. Number 23 Gonzaga at number 17 St. Mary's, 70-57. The Bulldogs get a very much needed victory, end a St. Mary's win streak that had ballooned to 16 games, I believe, handing them their first West Coast Conference loss of the season. Really, really important win for Mark Few's team.
Graham Ike, first Gonzaga player since Adam Morrison with 20 plus in 7 straight games. How about that?
It's really, I would have bet a lot of money that Drew Timme scored 20 plus in 7 straight games.
You would have thought somebody, right?
Yeah.
Him, Suggs, Kispert. You could go all the way back down to Brandon Clark or somebody. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the Pangos. I mean, somebody. But there you go. Yeah. Big win for Gonzaga. And this is, I finally went and got the numbers to back up my St. Mary's thing because I want to talk about this for a second. So I'm going to read you. These two teams are right next to each other in the net rankings as of today.
Sure.
When I checked earlier this morning. So here are their quad records broken down. They're both undefeated in quad 4, so that doesn't matter. St. Mary's 4-3 in quad 1, 3-2 in quad 2, 3-2 in quad 3, if I have that right. Gonzaga 3-5 in quad 1, 3-1 in quad 2, 4-0 in quad 3. So we are looking at a situation in which St. Mary's has 4 losses outside of quad 1. Gonzaga has 1. St. Mary's has 1 more quad 1 win than Gonzaga. And Gonzaga needs this game to make sure that, I mean, this probably gets them unless something horrible happens, to solidify, like you said, an important win to solidify their NCAA tournament hopes. And St. Mary's was a top 16 overall seed a couple weeks ago. And by the way, hadn't lost since then now because, right, they had what I think it was the longest winning streak in the country.
It was.
The resumes between these two teams just aren't that different. In some ways, I might argue, now again, Gonzaga had the Kentucky win in there, which does change this equation. That's an opportunity St. Mary's didn't get in the middle of conference play. But I'm just confused.
Are you really expecting me to try to tell you how this all works?
No.
Because
just wanted to make this point that St. Mary's non-conference struggles need to count in here somewhere. I understand they're not the same team now that they were then, but we can't just disregard non-conference play. And also credit to Gonzaga for getting things back on track here and making it where, even though St. Mary's is, dominating this conference, they're right back basically in the same spot heading into the conference tournament. And then, right, this is going to somehow get separated again. Hypothetically, these two teams face each other for your game 3 in the conference tournament. Then we probably feel a little bit differently breaking them in terms of which one gets the better seed come Selection Sunday. I found that very interesting and wanted to point it out.
So are you upset that St. Mary, because at that point, Gonzaga hadn't done anything. Gonzaga hadn't beaten Kentucky yet.
Right. So obviously part of this is that Gonzaga has actually caught up because they've taken advantage of the opportunities. Right.
Gonzaga has beaten Kentucky, San Francisco, and St. Mary's on the road. Until yesterday, there wasn't an argument about which one was better. Certainly before they beat Kentucky, when their best win was Syracuse.
Right. Oh, for sure. There was a big gap between these two teams in terms of resume at that point.
Yeah.
My point is more, we've been talking all season about, even after Kentucky, about Gonzaga as a bubble team. Now, granted, probably coming into this game, a team on the right side of the bubble. And certainly now a team on the right side of the bubble. But that all came because of, so they beat San Francisco and that Kentucky win. They went from might miss the NCAA tournament to same resume essentially as St. Mary's. That's my point. Is that if it only takes 2 games to get there, by definition, you just couldn't have had that big of a gap between those two teams to begin with. Does that make sense?
I guess, but there are also teams that take themselves. Gonzaga's not the only team that takes themselves completely off the bubble by getting the right win.
Right.
This isn't an uncommon thing.
No. I guess I just feel like Gonzaga, maybe we overreacted a little bit to how bad the situation was because they still had the opportunities left and they needed to. I just find it interesting more than anything. These two teams are not. Yeah, I don't have a huge issue. I guess I wouldn't have had St. Mary's in the top 16, but obviously they had a much better resume than Gonzaga at that point. Yeah, I'm not trying to have that conversation. Just I find it interesting. You're basically flipping a coin between these two teams right now. And if Gonzaga wins the WCC tournament, the team that was on the bubble for most of the season is probably going to have a higher seed than St. Mary's, and I won't have an issue with it. I just find that interesting.
Sure. I'm just glad both of them did what they needed to do in the last 2.5 months of the season to get into the tournament. Because both of them are, two of the 32, 28 best teams in the country. And one of them stumbling down the stretch and doing something that they shouldn't have done. And I guess Gonzaga would have been the team that would have potentially been in that situation more than St. Mary's. But if one of those teams would have missed the tournament, if Gonzaga would have missed the tournament, I think it would have just been tough.
Yeah. Well, and St. Mary's dug themselves now early in the season.
Sure, it's been a while, but sure.
Right. They weren't anywhere close to the tournament early, and then they just kept winning conference games. Yeah, so they have both put themselves in bad positions and pulled themselves out of them, and I'm with you. I'm really glad we get both of these teams. Hopefully we get a round 3 between them, and let's see what they can do against everybody else.
There you go. Josh, anything else?
Real quick, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and we've talked about this a little bit. So after both winning, Houston surviving, Jamal Shed making big plays like he does, Houston and Iowa State have 7 Big 12 losses between them. There is one other Big 12 team that has fewer than 7. That is Baylor. Baylor has 6. So as we get towards Selection Sunday here, either this conference is not as good as we think it is, or these two teams that have so clearly separated themselves need to get all the reward in the world on Selection Sunday. I'm talking Houston potentially as a number 1 overall seed. Iowa State, I just don't know how many teams, once you get past the 4 or 5 obvious ones, if, does North Carolina come into this conference and do what Iowa State's doing? I'm not convinced the answer is yes. I just wanted to point this out, that we have two teams in what you and I think both adamantly agree is the best conference in the country that are making this look easy and going toe-to-toe with each other, and neither is blinking, which is incredible. So either they're doing this in a conference that the narrative isn't quite right and it's not as good as we think, which I think is nonsense, or we got to just respect the fact that these two teams are so much better than everybody in the best conference in the country.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's all. Not that they're getting disrespected, but I think we're both kind of to the point where why isn't Houston getting number 1 overall seed conversation? Respect.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question.
Yeah, we'll see how things play out.
Yeah, indeed. Anything else?
That's all I had.
That's going to do it. Under 8 podcast, March 3rd, 3:39 p.m. We'll be back on Tuesday to discuss whatever has happened in the last 48 hours or so. Until then, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 Pod on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you on Tuesday.